Good morning, scholars. This is Miss Smith, and this week and for the next few weeks, we will be discussing the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and the Jazz Era. Today, I'll start with the Roaring Twenties. We had an era of prosperity, Republican power, and conflict. 1920, collectively known as the Roaring Twenties or the Jazz Era. In sum, a period of great change in American society. Modern American is born at this time. For the first time, the census reflected an urban society. People have moved into cities to enjoy a higher standard of living. Age of prosperity. Economic expansion, mass production, assembly line, which is some things that we were talking about in our class. This is also part of the World War I aspect. Age of the automobile. This is where Ford comes into play. Ailing agriculture. This is where the skilled workers are losing their money and their jobs. An angry depression in the early 1920s contributed to this urban migration. U.S. farmers lost agricultural markets in post-war Europe. At the same time, agriculture efficiency increased, so more food produced. More food equaled lower prices and fewer laborers needed. And this is where the strikes came into play with the skilled workers. So farming was no longer prosperous, and bankers called in their loans. Farms were repossessed. So American farmers entered the Depression in advance of the rest of society. So most of the farmers were suffering before anybody else because they lost their farms. Black Americans in this period continued to live in poverty. Sharecropping kept them in de facto slavery. So even though slavery was over, they still were having to deal with some form of slavery through a sharecropping. In 1915, boll weevil wiped out the cotton crop. So that's a bug. White landowners went bankrupt and forced the blacks off their land. So here they were using them. As soon as a bug messed up the cotton, they kicked them out. The Great Migration of 1916 and 1930. Blacks moved north to take advantage of the booming wartime industry. Black ghettos began to form, such places as Harlem. So the wartime, think about this. This is where World War I came into play, and a lot of the African Americans got into World War I and into the other wars. Within these ghettos, a distinct black culture flourished. Both blacks and whites wanted cultural interchange restricted. Marcus Garvey established the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which turned out to be something later. Believed in black pride, advocated racial segregation because of black superiority. Garvey believed blacks should return to Africa. He did purchase a ship to start the Black Star Line, and this is what he felt that they should go back to Africa in. Attracted many investments. Government charged him with fraud. He was found guilty and eventually deported to Jamaica, but his organization continued to exist. Republican power. President Harding, elected in 1920. Legacy of scandals. Teapot Dome. He died in office. President Coolidge, the business of America is business. President Coolidge. Fortney McCumber tariff. Smooth Harley tariff. No help for farmers. Foreign policy. Consumer economy. That's the washing machine. These are all different types of machines. See if you can guess what they are. You see the telephone, see the waffle maker, see the urn, refrigerator, looks like a stove. Culture of the Roaring 20's. That's the radio. Silent movies. Charlie Chaplin. Talkies. The Jazz Singer. Celebrities. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb. Jack Dempsey. Charles Lindbergh, The Spirit of St. Louis. The 20s is the jazz age, which is one of my favorite musics. The Flappers made up cigarettes and short skirts. Writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway. Musicians, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington. 1920s also brought about great change for women. In 1920, the 19th Amendment gave them the federal vote. After 1920, social circumstances changed too, as more women worked outside the home. And more women went to college and clamored to join the professions. Women didn't want to sacrifice wartime gains amounted to a social revolt. Characterized by the flapper new women, bobbed hair, short dresses, and they smoked in public. A society in conflict, anti-immigrant, National Origins Act, discrimination, Sotto Vanzetti trial, Italian immigrants, unfair trial. For immigrants, the point of origin has shifted to South and East Europe, and new regions appeared, the Jewish, the Orthodox, and the Catholics. Northern Europe immigrants of early 19th feared this shift and felt it would undermine Protestant values. This fear was known as nativism. Many wanted Congress to restrict immigration, leading to a quota that favored northern areas of Europe. Fear of immigrants from Southeast Europe led to a sentiment known as the Red Scare, fear of communist post-Bolshevik revolution. Basic community advocates, an international revolution by workers fears that the ideology could find its way into the United States. At this time, Woodrow Wilson was gravely ill following a stroke. His attorney general wanted to take a shot at presidency. He used fear of both immigrants and communism to his advantage. He had J. Edgar Hoover round up suspected radicals, many of which were deported. the Ku Klux Klan. Great increase in power, anti-black, anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, anti-women's suffrage. So they just was against everything. Anti-bootleggers. Scopes monkey trial. Evolution versus creationism. Science versus religion. Dayton, Tennessee. Famous lawyers. Prohibition. The 18th Amendment. The Volstead Act. Gangsters. Al Capone. We all know who that is. The Untouchables. Prohibition on manufacture and sale of alcohol, adopted in 1919, the 18th Amendment. An outgrowth of the long-time temperance movement. In World War I, temperance became a patriotic movement. Drunkenness caused low productivity and inefficiency, and alcohol needed to treat the wound. A difficult law to enforce, organized crime, speakeasy bootleggers was on the rise. Al Capone virtually controlled Chicago in this period. Capitalism at its zenith. Prohibition finally ended in 1933 with the 21st Amendment, forced organized crime to pursue other interests. And this was the end of the Roaring 20s.